Okay, I am going to put myself in place with this video. I'm going to say, Mason, you know what? You're not always right, Mason. You usually hyper-focus in on 1 to 2 statistics. You'll say a player's overvalued because of them, and maybe you're missing out on the rest of the picture. So what I want to do now is I want to compare my thought process with a few given players, compare that with the Dynasty community's thought process and the redraft community's thought process and go, okay, where's there some arbitrage? Where can we take advantage of this? Where does the redraft community have a player ranked and projected for this upcoming season? And if he hits that, how will that impact his dynasty value? Now, I know that was very confusing, so I'm going to give an easy example to understand. So right now, if we head over to Underdog Fantasy, where there have been $1 million worth of fantasy football drafts drafted already this offseason, so people really know what they're doing and they're putting their money where their mouth is, we are seeing that T. Higgins is going almost a full round before Jalen Waddle in drafts. However, if we go over and we look at Keep Trade Cut, well, they have Jalen Waddle ahead of T. Higgins, and they're the same age. And Joe Burrow's there for the long term. So that's a situation where we can say, okay, well, is the Dynasty community so right on this situation that Jalen Waddle should indeed be valued over T. Higgins, despite the redraft community who have pumped over $1 million into this system? Should we listen to them instead? And before we get into it, please make sure you go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And if you want to be one of those smart drafters having a ton of fun, y'all know we do this every single day on the live stream. If you want to go draft on Underdog Fantasy, make sure you go to the link in the description, sign up for Underdog Fantasy, use promo code FLOCK when you sign up. And when you use promo code FLOCK, they'll match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You'll get my 2022 Dynasty rankings, my 2022 redraft rankings. You'll get my Dynasty rookie draft card. You'll get a ton over there, but that should be enough. We are going to be looking at their ADP for this video. Let's go to Gabriel Davis. Now, I have been on record, and I just made a redraft video talking about this as well, saying Gabriel Davis is an overvalued player. Now, there are two different systems we are looking at. We are looking at redraft best ball, and we are looking at Dynasty. And here you have two completely different price points. At the time I'm recording this video, right now, Gabriel Davis is going in the 5th round as the 25th wide receiver off the board on Underdog Fantasy. Now, you hear a wide receiver that's 23 years old, that's going as the wide receiver 25 in redraft leagues, and you go, okay, well, where should he be going in Dynasty? Should he be the wide receiver 17, the wide receiver 16, the wide receiver 15? Because we assume that a 23-year-old is going to continue to improve. We assume that he's going to continue to rise in value. And usually you have to pay up in the Dynasty Fantasy Football community for that age. Well, if we head over to Keep Trade Cut right now, Gabriel Davis is going as the wide receiver 39. Now, this is very, very interesting. And I will say Gabriel Davis is the one example you can say, okay, yeah, he's going to provide you spike weeks. He's playing in Buffalo. Maybe hard to predict when those weeks are actually going to come. So you can maybe use the example of Gabriel Davis saying, okay, well, of course he's worth more in best ball than he's going to be in Dynasty, but still the gap this large is alarming. We're looking at Gabriel Davis on Keep Trade Cut right now as a wide receiver that's going behind George Pickens. He's going behind Christian Watson. Christian Watson is the same age as Gabriel Davis at the time of this recording. However, Christian Watson is going 7 rounds behind Gabriel Davis in redraft leagues. You're seeing that Gabriel Davis, despite being younger than Brandon Ayuk and going 5 rounds ahead of him in redraft formats, is being valued lower in Dynasty. You are seeing the same thing with Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney is going around after Gabriel Davis in redraft. However, he's going rounds ahead of him in Dynasty startups right now. And we can just continue to go through this list. We can continue to go through and look at these options that are literally older than Gabriel Davis and being drafted behind him in Dynasty. However, he is more valuable in redraft. And we have to ask ourselves, does this make sense? Should we be using this as a clear sign we should be trading for Gabriel Davis? Now, I will say, as the wide receiver 39 in Dynasty, I probably have to throw in the towel, and I probably have to say Gabriel Davis is worth trading for. If you can go through, if you can ship your 2023 second-round pick and you can bring in Gabriel Davis, if you could go out there, trade Brandon Ayuk for Gabriel Davis, if you could trade Christian Watson for Gabriel Davis, if you could trade George Pickens for Gabriel Davis, that's a deal that you probably end up having to make. Now, I will say, Underdog Fantasy, his ADP is out of control. You can never draft him in a redraft. Never in a million years. Because this is a wide receiver that, hell, through his rookie season, he averaged less than 4 targets a game. His second year, he averaged less than 4 targets a game. Now, yes, he popped off 201 passing yards for the Buffalo Bills against Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. Are we overreacting? Are we looking at one of the best playoff performances ever from the wide receiver position with 4 receiving touchdowns going, oh yeah, this is what we should expect? No, you shouldn't expect that going forward. Of course, you should not expect anything close to that going forward. I don't even know what the takeaway is here. I honestly just want to give a shout out to the Dynasty community because I think that they are on top of it. I think they realize, oh no, if we take a step back, if we look at the fact that Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley, 34-year-old Emmanuel Sanders played over Gabriel Davis this past season. Gabriel Davis may be getting propped up because of his situation, but the underlying talent level is not there. And maybe these two ADP marks should almost meet each other in the middle. Maybe what the play is, if you're going and you are drafting in 2022 fantasy football redraft leagues, you go, okay, I'm avoiding Gabriel Davis there. But if you're drafting in Dynasty, then you go out of your way, you target Gabriel Davis, because if he were to finish as a top 24 wide receiver, which is what his ADP indicates, where is he going in Dynasty startups next offseason? Is he then a top 5 round pick, top 60 pick overall in Dynasty startups? That is entirely possible. Now let's go over to a wide receiver that I actually think the Dynasty fantasy football community is possibly undervaluing. This is going to be Kedarius Tony. Now with Kedarius Tony, he's 23 years old going into year 2. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 47 in redraft. And if you're going into year 2 being drafted as the wide receiver 47 in a redraft, we can assume that your Dynasty value should be higher than that, right? Your Dynasty value should be wide receiver 36, wide receiver 30, at least. Well, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 47 on Keep Trade Cut right now as well. And I actually love the idea of going out of our way and buying into Kedarius Tony. And the reason for this is one statistic and one statistic alone. If we go through and look at his yards per route run, the reason I want to look at yards per route run for Kedarius Tony, we've been talking about this for over a month, is because this is a wide receiver that we know missed a decent stretch of games. Not only did he miss a decent stretch of games, but at the end of the year, he was playing with Mclaurin, the worst quarterback in the NFL last season. On top of this, a lot of those games he played, he was injured in. He only had one drive against the Rams the week after he blew up for over 101 receiving yards against the Dallas Cowboys. Off the top of my head, please don't get mad if I miss this off by a digit or two. I believe in that one drive against the Rams, he had like 3 receptions for 36 receiving yards before he goes down. So whenever you're seeing players go down at the beginning of games, playing through injuries where they're only getting to 50-60% of the snaps, it will skew the per game statistics. It's very hard to look at Kedarius Tony, who averaged 42 yards per game last season, and say that's a fair mark to critique him by. But hell, we can look at yards per route run, and yards per route run 2.2. If we look at the wide receivers that averaged more yards per route run than Kedarius Tony last season, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Antonio Brown, AJ Brown, Deontay Harris, a random name, Jamar Chase, Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb. Those were the wide receivers that were here in this tier with Kedarius Tony. I think the overall Dynasty fantasy football community is honestly maybe in their own little bubble here with Tony, because if y'all remember, not many people liked Kedarius Tony coming out of college. I remember getting so much hate for ranking Kedarius Tony over Michael Carter Jr. in our Dynasty rookie rankings in 2021. And the only comeback that I would have to it is I go, yes, I understand nobody likes Tony, but at the end of the day, it's very hard for me to ever draft a day 3 running back over a round 1 wide receiver. And if we just remove ourselves from what you thought of Tony last season and we go back and reevaluate him, what we can confidently say is, well, yeah, he didn't have a great production profile. He played with Kyle Pitts. He was an elite level athlete at the combine, and he got drafted in the first round. Then when you combine that with his yards per route run, Kedarius Tony does have top 24 overall upside. And for a wide receiver to come in and finish as a top 24 wide receiver in Dynasty, his second year, where's he then being valued in dynasty leagues? What is he being valued as the wide receiver 20, wide receiver 19? That's in the range of outcomes for Kedarius Tony this upcoming season. There's no reason for a second-year player to be valued equally in redraft and dynasty. I think this is a clear sign to go and trade for Kedarius Tony in dynasty. I'm fine drafting him in a redraft as well. This isn't a Gabriel Davis type situation where I feel like the redraft community has lost their minds. Now let's move over to Jerry Judy, the perfect example of a player that I want to bring up. 23-year-old wide receiver, younger than Kenny Pickett, right? Younger than Kenny Pickett, being drafted as the wide receiver 20 on Underdog. Y'all know we've talked about trading for Jerry Judy. We've talked about going out of your way to get Jerry Judy for I don't know how long now. You have him going as the wide receiver 22 on Keep Trade Cut. This is exactly how you use this tool. This is exactly what we can say. Terry McLaurin right now in redraft leagues have been over $1 million pumped into this ADP. Okay, so it's sharp ADP. It's going to be the best ADP you can find. Terry McLaurin is going behind Jerry Judy in redraft leagues. Terry McLaurin is 26 years old compared to 23-year-old Jerry Judy. However, the Dynasty fantasy football community values McLaurin higher. That is crazy. That is certified loco in the cabeza. That is exactly what we are looking at. Here with Jerry Judy, this is a wide receiver that went out there, dominated Cortland Sutton over the past 2 seasons. I'm going to continue to bring this up. According to Rotoviz, 1.9 yards per route run compared to Cortland Sutton at 1.5 last year. And if we look at the first 2 years of Jerry Judy's career, we've had 11 games. We've had 11 games where both of these wide receivers have played together. Jerry Judy, in those games, 8.5 points per game. Cortland Sutton, 4.5. I understand the worst quarterback play in the NFL outside of Mike Glennon. But if you're expecting that Russell Wilson comes in here, elevates the overall offense, you're looking at a 23-year-old cornerstone asset who's a great prospect coming out of college. Now, I know the production profile wasn't there, but he played with Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith. He came into the NFL at 21 years old. Those were the wide receivers he went up against. He was drafted in the first round. There's no reason for Jerry Judy, who should be a wide receiver 2 this year in fantasy, to be valued as a low-end wide receiver 2 in Dynasty whenever he's 23 years old. I'm going through. I'm getting Jerry Judy everywhere I can. Now, our next wide receiver is a 25-year-old option, so stepping into the prime of his career, currently being drafted as the wide receiver 17 in redraft leagues, but the wide receiver 28 in Dynasty. It's going to be Hollywood Brown. Now, I will admit, Hollywood Brown is another wide receiver very similar to Gabriel Davis, where I believe that you could make an argument. Okay, Mason, this is because it's best ball. We know Hollywood Brown, a field stretching option, someone that wins with efficiency rather than volume, someone that is going to provide you random spike weeks. At least that's what I thought. That's the assumption that I've had with Hollywood Brown for quite a while. But diving into Hollywood Brown, what you are going to find is, no, that's not necessarily the case. With Hollywood Brown, while we want to act like, oh yeah, you have some random spike weeks, it just randomly is popping into your... No, it's been consistent. You've seen consistent volume with Hollywood. Like last year, if we just go through his targets, starting week 1, 6, 10, 7, 5, 10, 5, 14, 12, 13, 10, 7, 8, 14, 9, 8, 8. That's not necessarily volatile. You're looking at Hollywood Brown, while yes, wide receivers inherently are going to be volatile compared to other positions like running back and quarterback, but no, this is a standard distribution for wide receiver points overall. And with Hollywood Brown, while yes, he's maybe being propped up in Dynasty because DeAndre Hopkins will miss the first 6 weeks, hell, you're looking at DeAndre Hopkins as a wide receiver that's going into year 10. Year 10 of his NFL career. Hollywood Brown very easily could not only be the wide receiver 1 in Arizona this season, but even with DeAndre Hopkins playing a full schedule next year, Hollywood Brown could yet again be the wide receiver 1 in Arizona, and he's 25 years old. This is a player that has averaged 25% of his team's targets over the past 2 seasons. That was in an offense that had Mark Andrews. Last year, they had Rashad Bateman as well. I know Bateman was injured to start the year, but Hollywood Brown still is dominated in targets, There's no reason to assume that changes when he comes over to Arizona, especially to start the year when you have no DeAndre Hopkins. And this will be the best quarterback play he's ever seen. Getting that jump from Lamar Jackson to Kyler Murray, maybe you want to make an argument that Lamar is a better real-life quarterback because the rushing upside's more. I'm not going to get into that. That's not my job. No, who cares? What I care about is fantasy points. Kyler Murray is a better passer than Lamar Jackson. I think you'll be able to hit Hollywood Brown consistently deep. Hollywood Brown's probably a value in Dynasty right now. Like, if we look at Hollywood, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 28 on keep trade cut. This is after Elijah Moore, after Mike Evans, after Chris Olave, after Rashad Bateman, after Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith's a great example of this. I mean, Smith is not that much younger than Hollywood. Hollywood's probably in a better situation going forward if we're projecting a few years out because A.J. Brown's not going anywhere. A.J. Brown's going to continue to be the alpha, whereas you're going to have DeAndre Hopkins fading into the background. Another example, Terry McLaurin, 26 years old. Terry McLaurin being drafted as the wide receiver 21 on keep trade cut. However, being drafted behind Hollywood by a wide margin in a redraft. Hollywood Brown, yet again, another wide receiver we're going to be going after. Now, let's pull up some names that I will admit, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. I think the Dynasty community, I think that the redraft community, they are both losing their minds with this. I just want to be fair. I want to be completely transparent, and this is where I need to reevaluate my process. I have previously called Michael Pittman Jr. an overvalued wide receiver in Dynasty. However, he's a 24-year-old option who is going as the wide receiver 14 in redraft. Just think about this. You're 24 years old. You finish as a low-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy. If that happens, all of a sudden, Michael Pittman Jr. is going in the second or third round of startup drafts next year. His value is skyrocketing just if he hits his redraft expectations. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 16 on keep trade cut. You're going to see that on keep trade cut, the Dynasty community is valuing DJ Moore. They're valuing Deontay Johnson over Michael Pittman Jr., and they're both older than Michael Pittman Jr., despite the redraft community saying Pittman's the guy we want to go with. This is something I need to look into. Maybe this is an example of me being overconfident with my own process and being overconfident with my own takes. I still want to stand by the fact that if you're drafting Michael Pittman Jr. here in redraft, you were crazy, but maybe in Dynasty, Michael Pittman Jr. is a better option than I gave him credit for. And with Cortland Sutton, I am not taking anything back. With Cortland Sutton, I am standing strong. The most overvalued wide receiver in redraft leagues and one of the most overvalued wide receivers in Dynasty. His Dynasty value is more appropriate. Dynasty, wide receiver 29. Redraft, oh my gosh. On Underdog, Cortland Sutton's going as the wide receiver 19. Now, if we are just being fair with this process, we can look at the fact that Cortland Sutton's 26 years old. We can compare this to other wide receivers that are being valued in a completely different tier than Cortland Sutton. We can say, okay, well, if we want to value this ADP, if we want to say that these redraft players know what they're talking about, Sutton should, in theory, be a great value in Dynasty. I'm not getting there. Maybe I just am an idiot. Maybe I am missing something with Sutton. But I think to recap this video, what we can say is if you want a diversified portfolio, if you want to go out there and use these tools to your advantage, trade for Gabriel Davis in Dynasty, avoid him in redraft. Trade for Hollywood Brown in Dynasty, avoid him in redraft. And we could say almost the same thing for Jerry Judy and Kedarius Tony. Those are going to be my favorite guys. And I think there are a couple of these guys like Hollywood Brown, like Jerry Judy, that you can maybe draft in both redraft and Dynasty. But that should be it. Thank you, of course, for being a part of the vlog. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I hope you have a great day, and I hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.